Counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10.
When Apollo 11 was launched in 1969, it was seen around the world as an incredible and unprecedented moment. The rocket ship took 3 men to the moon. It was one of the great human endeavors of all time, celebrating bravery and vast technical skill. But what would be the step beyond the moon? 3 years later, the people at NASA announced their grand vision, a manned voyage to Mars. And they needed a spaceplane that would pave the way. That machine was on nobody's drawing board. They needed a rocket ship that could push over 2 million kilograms away from Earth into an orbit 240 kilometers high. They needed a spaceship that could maneuver up there and sustain its crew for weeks in the hostile environment of space.
We're back with you visually, looking through camera Alpha.
Roger.
They needed it to be able to survive a fiery re-entry into the atmosphere and then glide home safely and intact.
Main gear touchdown.
And they wanted this craft to be reusable, to return to space again and again. They needed the Space Shuttle. Never before had science and technology come together to develop something so amazingly complex. Never before had men and women created anything even remotely like the Space Shuttle.
It's really hard to believe that a shuttle launch is a man-made event. The flame and the exhaust plume is so bright, it's like looking into the sun. The power of the engines creates a vibration and a shaking of the earth.
When a ship takes you into that environment and takes that good care of you and brings you back home in great shape, it's more than just a hunk of metal and bolts.
It is such a tremendous amount of energy, yet the limits within which it must fly are very, very narrow. So you've got something that's powerful, but delicate at the same time.
A fleet of these machines has flown more than 520 million kilometers in Earth orbit, placing an incredible 9,000 tons of satellites and communications equipment into space. 230 astronauts have made this journey, all televised, and they seem so completely familiar that the thrill and real danger of space exploration is almost forgotten. But in fact, there is much about the Space Shuttle that we do not know at all. We've become accustomed to seeing the shuttle up there, seemingly suspended, hardly moving. Yet the astronauts are traveling around the Earth at 29,000 kilometers an hour. And as they go about their work, they can glance up at 16 sunrises in a single day. There are 4 orbiters in the NASA fleet: Columbia, Discovery, Endeavour, and Atlantis. Beneath the shining bright skin of the orbiter is an astonishingly compact and ingenious world. Up front on the top level is the flight deck, the bridge of the ship. And if Captain Kirk were aboard, this is where he'd be. Here are the flight controls for maneuvering in space and for landing the ship later, like an aeroplane. The computer consoles hold programs unique to each mission. On the middeck, the crew eats and sleeps and relaxes when there's a moment to relax. Below deck is where they put their stuff. Most importantly, the lithium hydroxide canisters, which filter carbon dioxide from the air. The airlock leads from middeck into the cargo bay. It's from here that the astronauts suit up before they step out into the payload bay to go to work. At the rear, you'll find 3 huge engines that help lift the machine into orbit, and 2 engines that let it maneuver once it's up there. The shuttle's historic design triumph is its ability to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, intact from orbit to Earth, in 45 minutes.
Columbia, Houston, the winds at Edwards remain light on runway 22 right now. They're 204 at 11 knots. Forecast winds remain unchanged. Those are within limits. You have a go for the burn.
Roger, go for the burn.
To break out of orbit, the shuttle must allow gravity's steady pull to take over. Once the ship is turned around, the pilot fires the orbital maneuvering engines in a powerful burst. Slowing, the shuttle drops into low orbit. Now the crew has just 30 minutes before they encounter a wall of fire.
When you hit the Earth's atmosphere, you're doing Mach 25, or about 18,000 miles an hour. And the way you slow down is by pancaking or sort of speed braking the orbiter into the Earth's atmosphere. What that does, though, is generate a tremendous amount of heat.
5 seconds. 3, 2, 1.
At 122,000 meters, the orbiter hurtles into Earth's atmosphere. The nose cone and leading edges are quickly glowing at temperatures hotter than molten lava. As the ship screams down into the thicker atmosphere, it collides with trillions of tiny gas molecules. Striking them so hard, it creates a glowing ionized plasma that swirls around the shuttle.
And I can see the plasma just building and collapsing in a bright white flash down the middle of the vehicle.
This plasma is crazy.
It's like little pieces of vehicle flying off in front of us there.
In 15 minutes, the shuttle emerges from its fiery cocoon. On the last leg of its journey, it is falling home.
1.2 Gs, folks. Descending through 76,000 feet at 270 indicated.
At 30,000 meters, air data probes are deployed to measure airspeed. When subsonic speeds are reached at about 15,000 meters, the shuttle pilot takes manual control and has 5 minutes to land an unpowered vehicle coming in at almost the speed of sound. Any astronaut qualifying to pilot the shuttle must log hundreds of hours in various training aircraft. Shuttle veteran Eileen Collins is the first woman to have done just that. And now, with over 1,000 practice approaches under her belt, she is qualified to become commander on shuttle mission STS-93.
Tower NASA 913, after this pattern, we'll be requesting departure to the local area.
The shuttle is a difficult aircraft to fly, especially having flown military aircraft or other civilian aircraft. It doesn't have engines when it comes back to Earth. It has a very, what we call high wing loading. It has the short, stubby wings, and I guess you could say it is a low lift-to-drag ratio. It sinks like a brick.
Without engines, gravity gives the pilot only one chance to get it right. So the moment is rehearsed again and again in a special Gulfstream jet.
It's a highly modified Gulfstream II. Flies almost exactly like the Space Shuttle. The same descent rate, the same type of drag. Just prior to landing, you're descending on a 20-degree glide path, which is about 6.5 times greater than what you would descend at in a commercial airliner. It's very, very important training for shuttle pilots.
The shuttle announces its arrival with 2 sonic booms as the leading edge of the wing and tail break the sound barrier. Aided by a microwave scanning beam landing system, the pilot zeroes in on the longest and smoothest landing strip in the world. It's over 5,000 meters long, yet the difference in elevation from one end to the other is less than 1/4 of a centimeter. It actually conforms to the very curvature of the Earth. Touching down, the first spaceship ever designed to fly like a plane has landed.
Okay, down 1.5.
As the astronauts adjust to gravity, the orbiter recovery convoy goes to work. For 4 hours, the vehicle sits cooling on the runway. Toxic fumes from the hypergolic fuels must be vented.
You know when you hook into the safety things?
Time-sensitive payload offloaded. And the shuttle itself must be readied for a return to orbit. Within 10 hours of a space shuttle landing, a team of 90 people at the Orbiter Processing Facility are inspecting and repairing the wear and tear of the 6 million kilometer journey.
If you owned a recreational vehicle and you were going to take it on a very long trip, before you did that, you would probably put it in a garage and you would ask the mechanics to check everything. When you put the space shuttle, the orbiter, in the Orbiter Processing Facility, the OPF, you do just that.
The orbiter has about 6 million parts, and they're all scheduled to go back up in 90 days.
Every landing when the bird comes in, we check for meteor strikes, scratches that may occur on those 6/10,000ths. It'll be about the size of your hair. The end of your hair, if you looked at it, that's the size that we look for on the window.
The same precision goes into checking the 3 main engines. Each main engine is 4 meters long. Weighing in at over 3 tons, it generates an enormous amount of energy. These high-performance engines are operated at 104% of their rated power level. To maintain them for up to 55 flights, NASA had to create a roomful of one-of-a-kind tools. It's a wonderful example of the old saying, the right tool for the job. The borescope is one of them. The engine's turbo pump is cast as an almost solid piece, so the borescope is used to peer inside, to check for cracks on the blades that must revolve at 36,000 revolutions per minute.
The aft compartment of the shuttle is kind of like a maze, and it's all very sensitive and very delicate. You have a titanium thrust structure that holds thousands and thousands of pounds of thrust. Right next to it, you have stainless steel at a very, very thin thickness. Imagine being back here during a orbital liftoff. You've got gallons and thousands of gallons of liquid oxygen flowing through this feed line. And it's coming from the external tank disconnect located down there.
Through these feed lines, powerful turbo pumps draw liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen at a rate that would empty a large swimming pool in 20 seconds. These two cryogenic fuels, maintained at hundreds of degrees below zero, are forced together in a combustion chamber just 25 centimeters across, where they explode to produce 250,000 kilos of thrust. So that the engine is not destroyed by heat, it's frozen by the liquid hydrogen flowing all around it. As the engine fires, it jumps instantly to 6,000 degrees, reaching full thrust in only 4 seconds. The entire surface of the shuttle is a masterpiece of thermodynamic design. The underside of the fuselage is covered with a jigsaw puzzle of 35,000 individually fitted silica tiles. Each tile is numbered and cut to conform exactly to the contour of the skin.
Let's see how even it is when we make our measurements. Okay. I might have to put another one on. It's fairly even from this side. My 5-0 right now.
The tile material conducts the heat of re-entry away from the orbiter so efficiently that after coming out of a 2,000-degree test furnace, it can be picked up by the bare hand in just a second. As seen in infrared footage, the orbiter's surfaces were designed to withstand different temperatures. The nose cone, which sustains direct collision with the atmosphere, is made of solid carbon. Other parts are covered with heat-resistant blankets, stitched across the surface of the orbiter like a nicely fitted overcoat. But nothing required the labor or the leap of faith like the tiles. In the late 70s, it looked as if they might not do the job. 335 man-years had gone into installing the tiles by the time astronauts Robert Crippen and John Young took the first shuttle ride all the way home.
Well, we really had no idea what to expect, and we went to all these meetings where people said the tiles would come off. But it was really this absolutely magical piece of machinery. It maintains a temperature that's outside the vehicle. On the nose cone, it's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the vehicle, the temperature is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal tiles maintain that.
Now, when we do the simulator training, we have an astronaut crew in the actual simulator itself. We have a training crew, which is down at the console, and they have a script that they have written ahead of time on a list of malfunctions that they're going to input into the simulator. And then we have flight controllers over in mission control, and they don't know what kind of malfunctions are coming. And the astronaut crew doesn't know what's coming.
In training, they pound on us incessantly. But after a while, you even get used to an environment where there are 20 or 30 malfunctions an hour coming at you, and you get used to it.
Holler when you're out of the...
Houston for Eileen. Discovery Houston, main engine limits inhibit, stuck in the bucket.
Simulation training allows astronauts to maintain a high level of confidence under an even higher level of stress. They spend a lot of training time being shaken up in this big box, living through complex scenarios of disaster.
They have to deal a lot with the physics of the situation because engines can only do so much, the trajectory can only do so much. You can't fool Mother Nature, and in the end, Isaac Newton always wins, and what Newton's law says we can do is what we can go do.
But bodies in motion has a whole new meaning in zero-G.
Everything's going its own direction. It's got its own little velocity. So you're surrounded in space with all kinds of objects which are going their own way. It's incredible the freedom that zero-G in spaceflight is.
A brief sense of that freedom can be achieved in a special plane, the KC-135, sometimes called the Vomit Comet. Flying up and down parabolas, it sends its passengers into free-falling weightlessness.
as you push over, if you push over at the same accelerated rate as gravity is pulling you down, you get a sense of weightlessness. Well, that only lasts 30 or 40 seconds per parabola, because obviously you've got to pull the nose of the airplane back up or you ruin your whole day. You don't get a feeling of falling. It doesn't feel like you're falling. It feels as though you're inside a room or a vehicle and there is no gravity. Somebody has suddenly hit this anti-gravity switch and you and everything around you begin to float. That's the feeling that you have.
In space, that feeling lasts for more than 30 seconds. Because up here, the shuttle, traveling at 28,000 kilometers per hour, is carefully balancing between the force of gravity that is trying to pull it back to Earth and the centrifugal force working against gravity. The shuttle is actually falling around the face of the Earth, and the continuous free fall creates the sensation of weightlessness for those inside. The logic is indisputable, but it doesn't make it any easier to live with. In the payload processing facility, a massive, strong back crane moves cargo in and out of the shuttle's payload bay. Roughly the size of a great blue whale, the bay can be reconfigured for any array of mission hardware. This payload can be anything from a military satellite to a highly complicated scientific laboratory. Some payload is controlled from the shuttle, some from the ground through sophisticated telemetry.
Here at Space Lab Mission Operations Control.
Each breakaway unit represents years of work on Earth, and payload specialists on board train for months to execute the work of teams anxiously monitoring their projects in space.
And we're now seeing the highly magnified image from the Wisconsin instrument as it is trained on this Galaxy NGC 1068.
GPS CDR, go ahead, on left keyboard.
To guard the delicate cargo against contamination, strict cleanroom conditions are enforced throughout the payload facility.
50. And execute.
Below deck, reams of wires and sensors are checked, and then checked again, and again.
DC power 2 switch off.
When it comes out of the orbiter processing facility, all the work's been completed, all the tests have been passed, all the data's been reviewed. Everyone is satisfied and is asked to say that, at least to themselves and to their immediate supervision. Are you ready? Is your system ready? The only thing that you sit there and think is, was there something that someone, or is there something even that I missed along the way that somehow or other we could have caught? You can't help as a human being not to have that nagging feeling that, have you ever done enough?
The shuttle is now ready for its final configuration in the Vehicle Assembly Building, a mammoth structure 43 stories high that once housed its predecessor, the Saturn V. Here, it is raised upright. The orbiter is, after all, a rocket, and it can only take off while standing on its tail. Once upright, the orbiter is carefully mated to its massive external fuel tank. The process is so delicate that it takes 36 hours. The tank will hold 500,000 gallons of highly explosive fuel. The slightest snag would mean disaster. Flanking the external tank are two solid rocket boosters, the SRBs, 45-meter-long tubes of solid, supercharged fuel, encased in steel. The SRBs have been tested and engineered to provide 85% of the force required to lift the shuttle off the pad. They are the most powerful rockets ever built. The slowest part of the orbiter's 5 million kilometer journey is the first 5 kilometers. At 1.5 kilometers an hour, the aptly named Crawler is the largest and possibly the slowest vehicle in the world. Weighing in at nearly 3 million kilograms, the Crawler tilts, shimmies and pivots to keep the orbiter upright on a mobile launch pad, and then using laser guidance, sets down its burden within a 1/16th of a centimeter. A clumsy, lumbering beast that can stop on a sixpence. Once at the pad, the shuttle's external tank is filled with cryogenic fuels. It is now a volatile rocket in which 7 people will ride. In the hours before the launch, the pad is cleared of all but the most essential personnel. Among them, members of the ICE team.
We've only got 2 hours to look at every square inch on this vehicle and pronounce it ready for launch. We are well aware that there's over 2 million pounds of solid rocket fuel in the boosters and over 500,000 gallons of cryogenic fuel in the external tanks. So it is a hazardous operation. There is potential for major problems there should anything ever occur. So all the team members are volunteers.
After all the planning and designing and building and hoping for the best, the success of the journey finally comes down to the people who will make the trip.
We're at the 195-foot level of the tower. Crew module's right here. The external tank is not more than 20 feet to this side, and there's a solid rocket booster that's loaded and ready to go that's right next to it. So we're right in the middle of it. You're one of a dozen people that you're out here, and everybody else is 4 miles away.
In the firing room, 300 technicians and engineers prepare to launch as systems power up.
They're not going to get much below minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but engine 2, engine 1 might be down to minus 200. I guess it's because of orientation.
TLS, what is it? TLS, go. Yeah, 534, pick up for the clock. Okay, TLS. There you go. Okay, we got you now. Here while you're ready for a count.
At this point, you're kind of numb to the whole thing, I think. You're just excited a bit and looking forward to getting in and strapped in and settled down. It's a bit uncomfortable like this. Kind of laying on some valves in the back of the suit, but it's not too bad for the first hour and a half or 2. As you approach a little after that, you start getting a little uncomfortable with sometimes back pain. So the quickest way to get comfortable is to launch,
Okay. All right, well, I'll try to fend off the dogs. All right.
There is no actual button that someone pushes. It's operating the keyboard to set up the ground launch sequencer to take us through that final launch phase and launch the vehicle.
90, 96.
In this pyramid of reaching the final go for launch, everyone is polled formally over a network where they have to indicate that they are really go to proceed, and that makes the person really think about it.
NASA Test Director, this is ICE team.
channel 232. We're complete on the FSS 215-foot level. Everything looks fine.
If I'm comfortable that we've conducted this process in an orderly manner and that there's nothing out there that's bugging anybody, then it's fairly easy to give the go-ahead to launch.
At T-9 minutes, the ground launching sequencer of the space shuttle is activated. During every moment of the orbiter's journey, sensors and instruments located throughout its structure are feeding its computers vital flight information along 3,000 kilometers of wire. By now, the computer programs that will launch and control the flight have rehearsed the mission more than 10 times. And for the past 3 years, programmers have been at work refining the programs, modifying over 500,000 lines of instructions.
T-1 minute.
31 seconds before launch, the computers take over the countdown, making over 4 million decisions every second.
Endeavour's computers now controlling. 7, 6, main engine start, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, observing the changes of planet Earth.
The main engines create acoustic shock waves so powerful their vibration would be enough to shake the shuttle apart before it ever got off the pad. To dampen these waves at the exact moment the engines reach full thrust, 300,000 gallons of water are released into a trench below the shuttle. The vapor and exhaust fumes blow out more than 2 kilometers. As the shuttle accelerates, massive stresses build up on its light aluminium frame. To prevent it from disintegrating, the main engines must be throttled back until the shuttle reaches thinner air in the upper atmosphere. When pressure reduces, the shuttle opens its throttles, rocketing towards space at 4,800 kilometers per hour. Two minutes from launch, the solid rocket boosters burn out and fall towards the Atlantic Ocean.
Booster separation confirmed. Performance nominal.
"85 kilometers up, the sky goes quickly from blue to jet black. Traveling at 27,000 kilometers per hour, the raw and tremendous G-forces of the launch suddenly vanish. This is MECO, main engine cutoff. As the spent external tank falls away, the astronauts are coasting in the silence of space. The orbital maneuvering engines are fired, setting the shuttle into a circular Earth orbit. Now, the real work begins.
Okay. Great. Airlock pressure going down, Ken. Copy.
Columbia, Houston, you have a go to open the payload bay doors when you are in attitude, which will be about 2.5 minutes.
Once in orbit, the shuttle crew opens the payload bay doors. Open to space, the cargo bay becomes the workplace of the orbiter. Some payload work is accomplished without ever leaving the cabin. You simply look out the rear window and activate the remote manipulator system, a 15-meter remote-controlled arm. Grapple fixtures and closed-circuit cameras ensure accuracy. After grappling a satellite, the crew must release it with great precision so it can enter its own orbit. The pilot must carefully fire the reaction control thrusters to get out of the way, and the crew must brace themselves. In orbit, the shuttle's pilots slowly maneuver the ship along 3 axes, using a combination of the 44 reaction control jets and the 2 orbital maneuvering engines. All orbiting maneuvers must be precisely calculated to control trajectory, carefully balancing one jet thrust against another. Inside the shuttle, an atmosphere identical to that on Earth is maintained and filtered every 7 minutes. The payload bay doors double as giant radiators, and inside the temperature is a comfortable 68 degrees, despite outside fluctuations of 200 degrees Celsius as they travel between night and day. Below deck, oxygen and hydrogen are chemically combined in fuel cells to generate electricity with a useful byproduct, pure water. Some is jettisoned into space. The rest is used by the crew for washing and drinking.
Everything takes longer to do when you first get up there, whether it be going to the bathroom or preparing and eating your meal or anything. If I were to drop a pencil, zero gravity, the pencil could be floating right here behind my head, and I could spend, minutes looking for it until some other crewmate says, well, turn and look, it's right there.
Everything up here must be practiced. Astronauts have even had to learn how to eat.
Today we're going to do a food evaluation session for a couple of the astronauts, allowing them to try our EDO, Extended Duration Orbiter Rehydratable Food Package. Okay, what we recommend on opening the flip-top cans on orbit is when you get ready to open them, you have to be careful in zero gravity. You have to be sure and rock it gently, because if you jerk this lid off, you will sling product around the cabin.
Are you doing something there, Bob?
A tortilla can be flung like a frisbee, but a floating bean presents a different problem. In the end, what you can't find or eat, you have to vacuum up.
Oh, well. You got that hum there. Over your left shoulder there, right?
They were always used vacuum cleaners all over those vehicles all the time, trying to keep them clean. Because human beings, their hair falls out, their skin falls off. If you had to clean the floor of your house as much as you have to clean the ceiling, like we have to do in zero gravity, then you'd see how troublesome it is to get everything.
Houston, Columbia, you got 2 good APUs and number 3 waiting for Tane. Go, sir.
Though a vast bank of computers monitor and control the flight, each major system is being monitored at Mission Control in Houston by its own group of specialists. The orbiting crew will rely on them to provide the big picture.
First row of consoles, people are going to be mostly worrying about the trajectory of the orbiter, where it's going, and if we're making the places in space we've got to get to. The second row of consoles is mostly going to be worrying about the systems on board the spacecraft. The third row is mostly going to be concerned with the command of the vehicle, the flight director, and overall decisions, and the Capcom communicating with the crew.
In a launch emergency, their aim is to get a response back up to the crew in less than 15 seconds. They can do this because of a complex constellation of 6 tracking data relay satellites in geosynchronous orbit. They send millions of bits of information back and forth between the shuttle and the hub of communications in White Sands, New Mexico. These satellites, which were in fact deployed by the shuttle itself, can relay the entire contents of a 20-volume encyclopedia in a single second.
Gate 51, secondary seal. The secondary seal pressure will stay low like that, negative, because it's a Block 1 engine. It doesn't have a transducer in application.
Most of the time, everything goes very well. And, but then there are those moments where suddenly, and very unexpectedly, you're in a situation where your performance has ultimate consequences.
Flight fighter, you copied? We do need a restart.
Okay, thanks.
Copy that.
The first night that we had grabbed the Hubble telescope, and we had problems folding up the solar array.
One side of it is bent way over.
That is affirmative.
And we had a situation where NORAD reported that we'd had a breakup of an object in orbit, and there was a piece of material headed our way. If we attempted to maneuver out of the way, there wasn't much fuel margin to complete this mission. And there was the potential when we fired the engines that the solar rays would snap off, maybe even meaning that the Hubble would never be able to be made functional again. My job that night was to get the team working together. Let's get a good track on the object, let's get a good track on the orbiter, what are we gonna go do, what's the safest configuration for the Hubble if we have to do this. While we were still planning the activities for the next day, assuming it was gonna be completely normal, and I remember in the middle of it thinking, gee, we're barely breaking a sweat here.
TPC-4 is about the same clue will work for the people. So I'm going to do a course just for...
Years of planning have gone into every spacewalk or extravehicular activity, EVA. It's been practiced on the ground, in water, and through computers. But it all comes down to one person in a bulky suit at work in the void of space. Nothing goes through more rigorous scrutiny than the spacesuit itself. It's called an extravehicular mobility unit, and it's the key to a successful EVA. The suit weighs 135 kilograms and is only slightly easier to put on when it's weightless. The spacesuit is not a one-size-fits-all piece of design, and fitting an astronaut into one is an exacting task. The suit is adjusted not only for the astronaut's body, but for the mission at hand.
All right, start lifting. Ready? Yep. Okay, lift. Lift.
Story Musgrave knows how to wear this $10 million suit like few others. He spent over 26 hours in it on some of the most challenging EVAs ever attempted, including the groundbreaking Hubble telescope repair mission.
So when you're pressurized in the suit and you're in underneath, buried in the bilges of the telescope, reaching way up here to get some little connector and you can't move anything, and the lights go out, the sun goes down. I mean, it's like being held in a crevice in a glacier, but you like it.
Yes, there was 42 turns it took to get this guide set out. I counted. Believe me? No.
It's a lot of hard work moving around in space and working in space. The gloves are pressurized and they're very bulky. So it's impossible to do very, very fine maneuvers with your fingers. Therefore, the tools are all specially designed to be handled with big, bulky gloves on.
Okay, this throws me a lot higher here, Story, than in the water. I think it's going to be all right.
On the Hubble mission alone, 80 specialized tools were developed, ranging from electric screwdrivers to specialized Hubble hardware to make the repairs possible.
Mark, they should come out 7.5 to 9 turns. And of course, watch for the washer.
Through such efforts, unimaginable a few years ago, NASA's long-term goal of extending our reach to the planets beyond is now closer than ever, We're getting there because of missions like Hubble, because of the precision docking developed by the shuttle, and because of long-duration space flights carried out with the Russian space station Mir, and because we managed to make the impossible seem routine. In the past 30 years, times have changed in space, yet the pioneering spirit still goes on. A certain amount of personal gallantry has always been required to go into orbit. Senator John Glenn orbited the Earth 3 times in his Mercury capsule in 1962. His return to orbit 36 years later is due to take place on shuttle mission STS-95. He has trained vigorously for the job, and since he will be, at 78, the oldest person ever to go into orbit, his battery of medical tests will tell us much about the future of living in space. After 20 years of work in space, the shuttle fleet is now poised to begin the grand mission for which it was first envisioned, to help construct a platform that will lead on to Mars. The shuttles are being modified for the new job. Their cargo bays are being reconfigured to carry aloft in sequence the thousands of kilograms of material that will be fashioned into the International Space Station. The job will call for 1,100 spacewalks and will take 5 years. From this orbiting platform in the sky will be developed new arenas of knowledge. From here, at some point in the future, the first manned trip to Mars will begin. And it will have been the shuttle, in its long, illustrious role as a space truck, that was indeed the first step.
Counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10.
When Apollo 11 was launched in 1969, it was seen around the world as an incredible and unprecedented moment. The rocket ship took 3 men to the moon. It was one of the great human endeavors of all time, celebrating bravery and vast technical skill. But what would be the step beyond the moon? 3 years later, the people at NASA announced their grand vision, a manned voyage to Mars. And they needed a spaceplane that would pave the way. That machine was on... Never before had science and technology come together to develop something so amazingly complex. Never before had men and women created anything even remotely like the space shuttle.
It's really hard to believe that a shuttle launch is a man-made event. The flame and the exhaust plume is so bright, it's like looking into the sun. The power of the engines creates a vibration and a shaking of the earth.
When a ship takes you into that environment and takes that good care of you and brings you back home in great shape, it's more than just...
But in fact, there is much about the space shuttle that we do not know at all. We've become accustomed to seeing the shuttle up there, seemingly suspended, hardly moving. Yet the astronauts are traveling around the Earth at 29,000 kilometers an hour. And as they go about their work, they can glance up at 16 sunrises in a single day. There are 4 orbiters in the NASA fleet: Columbia, Discovery, Endeavour, and Atlantis. Beneath the shining bright skin of the orbiter is an astonishingly compact and ingenious world. Up front on the top level is the flight deck, the bridge of the ship. And if Captain Kirk were aboard, this is where he'd be. Here are the flight controls, nobody's drawing board. They needed a rocket ship that could push over 2 million kilograms away from Earth into an orbit 240 kilometers high. They needed a spaceship that could maneuver up there and sustain its crew for weeks in the hostile environment of space.
We're back with you visually, looking through camera Alpha.
Roger.
They needed it to be able to survive a fiery re-entry into the atmosphere and then glide home safely and intact.
Main gear touchdown.
And they wanted this craft to be reusable, to return to space again and again. They needed the Space Shuttle.
A hunk of metal and bolts.
It is such a tremendous amount of energy, yet the limits within which it must fly are very, very narrow. So you've got something that's powerful, but delicate at the same time.
A fleet of these machines has flown more than 520 million kilometers in Earth orbit, placing an incredible 9,000 tons of satellites and communications equipment into space. 230 astronauts have made this journey, all televised, and they seem so completely familiar that the thrill and real danger of space exploration is almost forgotten.